The chamber smelled of burnt ozone and alien sterility, a scent that made Colonel Jack Iron Donovan's stomach turn. He stood at the center of the council's war room, his expression locked in stony indifference as the gathered representatives of the so-called United Front debated humanity's fate in clipped, desperate voices. Across the curved obsidian table, High Strategist 4 of the Yelth Dominion loomed, his elongated skull reflecting the cold, sterile light above. His 6 black eyes blinked in sequence as he delivered the ultimatum in a voice devoid of emotion. Surrender Earth's remaining colonies. Disband your military. Accept governance under the Council's authority. A pause, then the blow. Or be abandoned to extinction. Donovan heard the words, but his focus was on the room itself. The Allies, if they could still be called that, sat in uneasy silence, avoiding his gaze. The reptilian VRA ambassador busied himself with some data slate, while the chitinous Zeliar barely twitched a single one of its shimmering limbs. Even the Andari, their most reliable partners, refused to meet his eyes. They had already made their decision. Beside Donovan, Captain Tyler Typhoon Briggs exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Cowards. The word was low, but not low enough. Kvor's gaze snapped to him, and the alien's mandibles flared slightly. Briggs didn't care. None of them did. Sergeant Miguel, Mike, Cortez leaned in, arms folded. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice steady, deliberate. "You're telling us to lay down our weapons. Walk away. Just give up. He scoffed. "You think the Dominion will let us live?" Kvor tilted his head in the eerie, mechanical way his species did. "Your species' resistance is spirited, but futile. We have studied your history. You fight beyond reason, beyond logic. Admirable in small engagements, but against a superior force, pointless." Donovan's fingers twitched. He had listened to enough Dominion broadcasts, seen enough battle footage, to recognize the subtle, creeping certainty in Kvor's words. The war was already lost in the Council's eyes. The numbers were against them. The Dominion had crushed fleet after fleet, annihilated colony after colony. Humanity was bleeding out, and the so-called United Front had decided they weren't worth saving. This was a funeral, not a negotiation. Lieutenant Kyle Reaper Jackson shifted beside him, arms crossed. "So that's it, huh?" he muttered. "The greatest interstellar alliance in history, and they're rolling over like whipped dogs." Donovan took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle before speaking. "And what happens if we refuse?" Kvor's mandibles clicked, a faint expression of irritation. "Then the Council will recall its fleets, cease logistical support, and recognize your inevitable destruction as what?" Donovan cut in. "A necessary sacrifice, a regrettable consequence." His voice was iron. "A convenient conclusion to your little wars." The silence that followed was all the confirmation he needed. Briggs let out a bitter laugh. "They already made their deal, Colonel. Probably got their own peace treaties lined up, hoping the Dominion will be satisfied once we're gone." Kvor neither confirmed nor denied it. He simply folded his clawed hands together. "You have 3 days to comply. 3 days to roll over and die." Donovan straightened, his body taut with controlled fury. He glanced at his men, Briggs, Cortez, Jackson, and Dr. Nathaniel Carter, who had been silent through most of the exchange, calculating something behind those sharp blue eyes. They were all waiting for his decision, but they already knew what it would be. Donovan turned back to Kvor. "Here's my answer." He stepped forward, planting his hands on the obsidian table. The alien diplomats flinched at the sudden movement. Kvor, to his credit, did not. "We don't surrender." He let the words sit there, unshaken, absolute. "You can take your ultimatums and shove them," Briggs added, grinning. "Respectfully." Jackson cracked his knuckles. "Or not." Cortez let out a low chuckle. "Guess we're going to war alone." The council members shifted uneasily. Even the Andari ambassador, who had once spoken so highly of humanity's courage, now looked at them with something bordering on pity. Kvor merely exhaled through his slitted nostrils. "Your species was always destined for extinction. He rose, his towering form casting a long shadow across the chamber. So be it. He turned, departing without another word. The other representatives followed suit, some shaking their heads, others not even bothering with the pretense of remorse. Donovan watched them go. When the doors sealed shut, the room plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. Briggs let out a slow breath. Well, shit. Donovan turned to Carter. Tell me you've got something. The scientist ran a hand through his graying hair. Maybe, he admitted. We've been playing by their rules for too long. If we're going to survive, we need to start thinking like humans again. Jackson smirked. That means getting ugly. Cortez grinned. Good. I like ugly. Donovan looked at them, his soldiers his brothers. The last line of defense against extinction. He thought of Earth's burning colonies, the billions already lost, the ones still waiting for salvation that might never come. They had been abandoned, left to die. That was fine, because now nothing was holding them back. The silence in the war room didn't last long. Colonel Jack Iron Donovan turned on his heel, his boots striking against the cold metallic floor as he moved toward the hollow table at the center of the chamber. His team followed without question. There was nothing left to say. The council had made its choice. Humanity was alone. Briggs was the first to break the tension. I can't believe they actually think we're just going to roll over and die. He scoffed, running a hand through his short, dark hair. Like hell we will. Sergeant Miguel, Mike, Cortez cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room. They think they know how we fight, he muttered. They don't. Not really. Lieutenant Kyle, Reaper, Jackson leaned against the table, arms crossed. They're going to find out. Dr. Nathaniel Carter, the quietest of the group, tapped a few commands into the hollow interface. The display flickered to life, casting a cold blue light across their faces. The map of the known galaxy unfolded before them, marked with hundreds of red Dominion-controlled systems. The last human-occupied territories blinked in defiant blue, but they were islands in a sea of enemy red. We're outnumbered, Carter said, his voice measured analytical. Outgunned. No reinforcements. No logistical support. No supply chain. He turned to Donovan, sharp blue eyes narrowing. Tactically speaking, we're screwed. Donovan exhaled through his nose, barely acknowledging the words. He already knew the situation. He'd known it before they stepped into that room, before the council's betrayal was made official. The war had been going badly for months. But something changed when the council abandoned them. Now there were no more restrictions, no more rules, no more alien oversight demanding they fight with restraint, with so-called honor. Then we changed the battlefield, Donovan said simply. Carter arched a brow. That's a nice sentiment, Colonel. But unless you have a plan to turn rocks into warships, I don't see how we stop fighting their war, Donovan cut in. We stop thinking like soldiers in a conventional war and start thinking like something else. Briggs grinned. Guerrillas. More than that, Donovan said, eyes locked on the Dominion-controlled systems. We make them afraid. A slow, predatory grin spread across Cortez's face. Now you're talking. Carter frowned, his fingers drumming against the table. We're still working with limited assets. Even if we abandon traditional engagements, even if we take the fight to them using asymmetric warfare, we're looking at a logistical nightmare. Resources, weapons, intelligence. We can't just. We will, Donovan interrupted. His voice was iron. We use what we have. We steal what we don't. We take every Dominion system that's lightly defended, every supply line that isn't locked down, every weak point in their massive, overextended empire, and we make it bleed. Briggs exhaled, shaking his head. We're going to have to get creative. Jackson smirked. We've been holding back this whole time. The council didn't like our methods. He tilted his head. They thought we were too ruthless. Cortez chuckled darkly. Guess we're about to prove them right. Carter hesitated. This is going to get ugly, he warned. If we commit to this path, we won't be able to walk it back. Donovan met his gaze. Do you see another way? A long silence. Then Carter sighed, rubbing his temple. No, he admitted. I don't. Briggs clapped him on the shoulder. Then let's get to work. Donovan turned back to the holo display, his mind already racing ahead, pulling together the first threads of the war they were about to wage. The Council had given them 3 days to surrender. That was 3 days too many. The Dominion fleet arrived in perfect formation, their warships descending on Fort Independence like an executioner's blade. Thousands of meters of reinforced alloy and plasma cannons cast long shadows over the shattered remains of the surrounding colonies. The message was clear: submission or annihilation. Colonel Jack Iron Donovan stood on the bridge of the USS Vengeance, watching the enemy through the reinforced viewport. Their ships gleamed in the void, a testament to their technological superiority. But strength wasn't the same as power. Not real power. And the Dominion had yet to learn the difference. Captain Tyler Typhoon Briggs leaned against the command console, eyes locked on the tactical display. They're right on schedule. Predictable, Lieutenant Kyle Reaper Jackson muttered, arms crossed. Like clockwork. Sergeant Miguel Mike Cortez grinned. Clockwork's easy to break. Dr. Nathaniel Carter remained silent, fingers flying across his datapad. He didn't need to look up to know what was coming. The plan was already in motion. There was no stopping it now. Outside, the Dominion fleet repositioned, preparing to broadcast their final demand. The moment their flagship opened a channel, Carter sent a silent confirmation to the hidden relay satellites scattered throughout the system. The trap was set. A flickering image appeared on the main display. Supreme Commander Virun of the Dominion stared back at them, his scaled visage impassive. "Humans," he said, his voice smooth, unhurried. "Your 3 days have elapsed. You know your options." Donovan stepped forward, expression unreadable. "We do." Virun blinked once, slowly. "Then say the words." Donovan let the silence stretch, measuring the weight of the moment. Then he exhaled, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Go to hell." For a fraction of a second, Virun's nostrils flared. Then, the transmission cut. Briggs grinned. "I think we pissed him off." "Good," Donovan said. "Time to show them what happens when they push us too far." Beyond the viewport, the Dominion fleet began moving into attack formation. Plasma batteries powered up, their deadly glow illuminating the void. The Vengeance and her remaining defense fleet looked pitiful in comparison. A fraction of their size, outnumbered 10-1. That was fine. Carter finished his input, then nodded. "All set." Donovan gave the order. "Light it up." At first, nothing happened. The Dominion warships continued their advance, undeterred. Then, all at once, the system erupted into chaos. The relay satellites Carter had activated weren't communications arrays. They were Trojan horses. Buried within their systems were Dominion encryption protocols, stolen months ago in a skirmish the enemy had thought meaningless. And now, they were rewriting Dominion firewalls in real time. Half the fleet's targeting systems failed instantly. Weapons flickered offline. Shields collapsed. Then came the real surprise. Briggs tapped the command console, grinning as hidden mines detonated across the Dominion's formation. Chunks of twisted hull and scorched debris spiraled into the abyss, taking entire squadrons with them. Cortez whooped. "That's what I'm talking about." Jackson was already moving, sending new coordinates to the strike teams waiting in the shadows. Disruptors deployed. "We've got boarding teams en route." On the main display, Dominion warships floundered, caught in a storm of human ingenuity and sheer ruthlessness. What should have been an overwhelming show of force had turned into a slaughter, except this time, humanity wasn't the one bleeding. Donovan watched it unfold, his expression grim but satisfied. "They thought they knew us," he murmured. "They were wrong." Briggs chuckled darkly. "And they're about to learn the hard way." The battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, the war was finally on humanity's terms. The Dominion flagship burned. Chunks of its once impenetrable hull drifted through the void, glowing embers against the cold darkness of space. The ship's spine had been severed, its elegant symmetry reduced to jagged wreckage. Secondary explosions rippled across its surface as human boarding teams carved their way through its dying body, turning corridors into slaughterhouses. Colonel Jack Iron Donovan stood at the edge of the USS Vengeance S bridge, eyes locked on the devastation. The battle had lasted less than an hour, but the victory was absolute. Captain Tyler Typhoon Briggs exhaled, shaking his head as he watched Dominion ships either collapse inward or retreat, their once flawless formations now a desperate scramble. Hell of a sight. They never expected this, Lieutenant Kyle Reaper Jackson muttered. They thought we'd go quietly. He smirked. Guess we're bad at that. Sergeant Miguel Mike Cortez wiped the blood off his combat knife before sliding it back into his sheath. You think this is enough to make them back off? Dr. Nathaniel Carter, still hunched over his datapad, didn't look up. No. Donovan agreed. The Dominion wasn't just a military force. It was an empire built on the absolute certainty of its own superiority. Losing here wouldn't make them rethink their strategy. It would only make them angry. That was fine. Briggs exhaled through his nose. They're going to hit us harder next time. Good, Donovan said. Let them. Silence hung between them for a moment. Then Carter spoke. I've decrypted the flagship's internal logs, he said, fingers flicking through layers of stolen data. His voice was quiet, but edged with something dangerous. They weren't just here to wipe us out. Briggs frowned. What do you mean? Carter turned the datapad toward them, the screen glowing with lines of Dominion script. They wanted prisoners, specifically high-ranking officers. He glanced at Donovan. They wanted you alive. A chill settled over the room. Jackson scoffed. That's new. Not really, Donovan muttered. He knew what it meant. The Dominion had spent years underestimating humanity, dismissing them as a stubborn but ultimately inferior species. This meant they were rethinking that assessment. It meant they were afraid. Cortez cracked his knuckles. So what's the play? Donovan didn't hesitate. We hit them first. Briggs grinned. I like that plan. Jackson leaned forward. How hard are we talking? Donovan met his gaze, his voice cold. Extinction. A long silence. Then, slowly, smiles spread across their faces. The war had just begun.